Okay, well, I hope that welcome everybody. I hope that a few of you recognize yourselves in this because we like to start 2 years in advance. But given that we're talking about juniors today, what I hope to do over the next few minutes is give you some guidance on the things to be thinking about for juniors, because the time really to start is now. When you think of it, applications and essays will get written with the things that the juniors have done through the end of this school year. So if there's content that's not there yet, we've got to start working on it now. So let's get started. Let's get started by giving you a framework on how to think of it. I think of the content, what goes into the application, in 4 different tracks, and each track should have a plan, right? So there's the academic track, which is simply grades and what courses they're taking. The testing track, ACT, SAT, still worth doing, absolutely. Activities in school and activities outside of school. So if you have a plan for each one of these, that'll get you to a point at the end of the school year where the content, what you're going to write about, what the juniors are going to write about in the application is ready to go. Then also think about the elements of the application. Where are you going to apply the school list? What the narrative is going to be that's going to be described in the essays that the student writes, and then the application itself, right? So if you think of those 2 elements, the content and then what goes into it, it gives us an idea. It gives us a good framework for what to be working on right now as juniors. Okay, so the things to think about right now, especially are the bottom 2 tracks there, the activities in school and the activity outside of school. Everybody's pretty good at focusing on the academic and testing, right? Obviously, get good grades, challenge yourself academically. But the activities in the school and outside of school are really important in terms of the narrative that you're going to take. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But what's the story that the student's going to tell as the essays are written and the applications put together? The application elements, no need to worry about anything but the school list right now. And really, it's a little bit late now. We're in October, mid-October. But the reason to have a list right now is because the admissions officers for the school, for all the colleges, are visiting high schools right now. Mostly they're visiting to meet the seniors that are submitting their applications. But if juniors can get in there and meet the admissions officer, this is an opportunity to develop a relationship with the admissions officer over the next year. So having an idea of what schools are likely on that list can be very useful right now. Okay, so let's talk about the tracks. Academically, do as well as you can. Obviously, there's the GPA that students will apply with will be the GPA at the end of this school year, right? So that's the last chance to make it, and this year is really hard. If you haven't already experienced it as parents, and certainly any juniors that are watching this, this is tough, especially if you have challenging courses. Time management is the most important skill to have during this time period and next year as well. So if you haven't already mastered it, that's something really good to focus on and to have a system in place. I have this conversation with all my students, but particularly the juniors that I met this year, this calendar year. I have a few who are still very challenged by this, and right now it's really pushing them. So for your parents out there, this is a year to help them do that, to really enable having the student to do well. Okay, the other big thing is recommendations are coming this year, right? So chances are that 2 of the teachers that students have right now are the ones that are going to recommend. Now, the best recommendations are the ones that come from teachers that know the students well, especially if they know them outside of the classroom. So I have a conversation with all juniors at the beginning of this school year to think about who is likely to be the two teachers that they're going to ask for recommendations. And at the very top of the list, we put teachers that know you well. The answer is, well, I just got this teacher. I don't know. That's all right. The trick is go start having conversations. Get to class early. Say, hi, how are you doing? When they say hi back, when they reply to that, say, I'm fine. How are you? Don't just say, I'm fine. Say something about, I'm excited because the football team won last Friday, and I had a great game. Or I'm excited because our robotics team is about to go off to a competition. Or say something about what you are doing outside of the classroom. So even a 3-minute conversation about it gets the teacher to know you a little bit outside the classroom and builds that relationship. So the trick is to start doing that now, not try to do it in May or June as school is ending, and suddenly you have to ask a teacher for a recommendation. Okay. Testing. My goal for all my students is that they all finish testing by the end of junior year. Taking tests at the beginning of senior year, like this one that just happened in October, or these, is stressful. And during what's already a difficult academic year and what's already a time demanding moment of the year because applications are being written now, adding to that demand the stress of taking a test in October, which is going to feel like this is my last chance. If I don't get a good score on this test, I won't get into the college I want to get into, is very tough. So I work with all my students to try to get this done before the end of junior year, so senior year can be a little bit less chaotic. Okay. For the PSAT that just happened a couple of weeks ago, the only way that it matters is if juniors score in the top 1% of the state, because that makes them eligible for the National Merit Scholarship Program, which does strengthen the application. Other than that, it doesn't matter at all. So don't fret about the score. Don't feel like you should have done more. It's fine. It's very tough to get into that top 1%. So I wouldn't worry about it at all. It's easy. If you've not decided which to take, the ACT or the SAT, you should decide very quickly. I generally have juniors take one test in the fall and one or two in the spring, depending on how they do. Most students do better the second time they take it, and some do better the third time. After that, unless something obvious went wrong, like went to the test sick or got there late, or some event happened at the test that was disruptive, it generally doesn't pay to take it any more than 3 times. And even 3 sometimes is not worth it. The only gotcha on this is that the SAT is about to go digital. So if a junior took the test this month, it was on paper, in fact, or anytime this fall, it's on paper, and then starting next calendar year, they will be digital. And that is a very different test. The SAT is dramatically different as it's going digital. So I would suggest then, even if a student took the paper test now, think of taking a paper test, the digital test 3 times over the next calendar year. There is a test in the summer, so that can work out if necessary. That summer test also gives us is my trouble saver, if you will. I like to schedule everything for this to be done by the end of spring, but sometimes things go wrong at the test center that have nothing to do with the student prepared and everything. Stuff just goes wrong. And so then that summer test is a good safety net. One last note on testing is accommodations. Accommodations are for learning differences. And I am finding that many students are taking advantage of the extra time or the different accommodations that are made. So I have some students that say they don't want to, they don't feel they really need it because they have a slight learning difference. Yeah, it takes them a little bit longer, but they can work hard and do it. I highly recommend that if you're eligible for accommodations, you do it. It is a huge advantage. And if there's a learning difference, those exist for a reason, and you should take advantage of that. It takes time to set that up. So if there is a learning difference, go do the work with a counselor at school so that all this can be put in place in time to take the tests. Okay. Third track is activities in school. In general, I tell my students, you're going to have to write an essay that says, how have you made your school community better? Right? What are you doing other than just going to school and showing up to class? And this could be anything. It could be, I made my team better if I do sports. It could be things like I recruited middle schoolers to make sure they joined. I made sure that the freshmen were feeling welcome to the team. I have some students that guide their teams to do philanthropic things and go do community service as a team. So it'd be anything like that. And we're really looking for those attributes that colleges are looking. Leadership is an important. The top colleges are looking to educate the leaders and the leaders of the world, right? So the funny part is they, of course, want to see leaders to admit them into schools so they can make them better leaders. And so that's why we talk about it now. If the leadership is not there yet, that's okay. Is there a path? And it can be you become captain of the team next year, or you become stage manager of the theater next year, but you're just working toward it and you have a goal. Taking initiative is also important. So looking around and not just being there, but think of what can be improved about the school and do something about it. That's a good story to tell in a college essay. Also an opportunity to show academic curiosity, right? If you are particularly good as a subject, do you go do other research, learn other things, talk to your teacher about it, teach other students. Maybe there's a club that does, for example, a marine biology club, which I'm a fan of. And then that club shows academic curiosity and learns. So to do this, we need to, the whole point is to have a narrative, right? So I do something with all my students that I call the 5 adjective exercise. Lots of counselors do it. In fact, likely your school counselor will ask you to do it. And choose 5 words or short phrases to describe yourself, I asked the student. Now that's hard to do. Generally, they don't talk about themselves. And I asked them, pick these 5 things that you want the admissions officer to be able to say about you after reading your application. And then, of course, we want to describe a moment where that happened, right? And the reason we do this now is so that if there is no moment yet, we still have a year to create that moment. So if I say I'm academically curious and then I can't come up with any moment other than, oh yeah, the other day we talked about elephant seals and marine biology, and I was fascinated, and I went to do a whole bunch of research on elephant seals, and I visited the Marine Mammal Center to see them. So if that hasn't happened yet, then this is a time to think about, how do we make it happen? What is it that you can write about in your essays that demonstrates that you are actually any of these 5 things? So that's the reason we do it now. And it really is an interesting exercise. And it's fun to do with parents too, because often the parents, I ask the students to say, go to your parents and say, how would you describe me? What are you proud of? How are you proud of me? What is it that I do that makes you proud of me? And often they're surprised, and it's kind of a fun conversation to have because the students often don't know. Okay, so that's activities out in school. Activities out, the essay objective. The most important thing about the essays that are going to convey this narrative is it's not just a listing of what I did, but what they say about the person, about the student, right? And it's easy to just say, I did this, I did this, I did this. But the idea is to have a story is I did this because I am this kind of person, and this is how I'm curious. This is how I like to learn. So we want the essays to say what it says on the slide. This is the person I am. This is how I've learned it. And this is how I show up. And really, we're answering the question that the admissions officers have is like, if we have this person join our community, what's that person going to be like? Do we really want this person to be a part of our community? And really, how is the student going to contribute to our community? Okay, so activities outside of school. Similar question, but how have you made your community better outside of school? So this can be things like community service, obviously, activism, advocacy, and the same kind of descriptors apply in the slide before, right? Is there leadership? Is there some caring for someone other than themselves as a student, right? Now, hopefully at this point as juniors, there's already been some of this going on. So then now this fourth track should be, how can we make this better? How can I show more initiative in this activity? How can I show more leadership in this activity? So if you really think of it, we're looking to make a plan right now to create examples of the narrative that we want to give, that we want to put forth in the application. And having that thought process now is very useful. Okay, college list. Talk a little bit about this. Aim for the best fit college is the single most important thing to think about the college list. We all know schools. We all know the big name schools that are the Ivy Leagues and Stanford and Northwestern and Duke. And we know those for their academic challenges. And those are like the top 15, 20 schools. All the other schools that we know mostly is because they're regionally famous or because they have big sports programs, particularly football and basketball. So just knowing or hearing about a school is not necessarily an indicator of the fit of your student to that school. And there are a lot of schools that don't have famous or well-known football teams or basketball teams that are academically rigorous and interesting. And there are 4,000 colleges in the US. Most of you that are listening to this presentation are going to apply to the top 200, or to some of the top 200, not all of them. That's the top 5% of colleges in America. And there are some outstanding colleges on that list that you may not have heard of. So keep an open mind. Build a balanced list. In particular, I like to start students working on the likely schools, because those are the toughest ones to really come up with and have a good fit. The reaches are fun to talk about. You know, everybody wants to go to Stanford, everybody wants to go to Harvard and so on. And it's not hard to build that, and there are reaches for everybody. So, okay, you build, you know, which ones are you going to throw your hat in and see if you get lucky, right? Targets are not that tough. It's sort of a tier down, if you will. But they are just not quite as selective as the crazy ones. But imagine the scenario where the student was not admitted to any of the reaches or any of the targets. That is possible. It happens. Sometimes it happens for reasons that we don't understand. Maybe there was a recommendation letter that wasn't stellar. I had a student not too long ago that went to a teacher. You know, at least the teacher said something, but asked for a recommendation. And the teacher said, I cannot ethically write you a letter of recommendation, because there was a terrible relationship there and the student didn't know it. But at least the recommender didn't write the recommendation. So if that happens, then think of that scenario. Everybody's sad, everybody's disappointed, but hopefully you have some lists, some colleges on the likely list where you can say, okay, I'm going to one of my likely ones, but at least I get to do blank there, right? So finding the likely ones are the ones that take the most research, because it's tougher to say, okay, what's the good thing about going to this college that I'm really going to love? Ideally, you end up with a list of likelies, any one of which would be, yeah, it wasn't my reach school or even my target, but I get to go there and do something really interesting. Okay. We talked about college admissions officers that are visiting high schools right now. The person that visits the high school, that admissions officer, will be the first reader of the student's application. So that first cut is done by that person. In addition, if the application goes to committee, this is the person that becomes the advocate for the student in committee. So building a year-long relationship with that person can be very, very helpful to the application. Okay. Thinking about what attributes matter is a long, slow process for most students. So starting now is a really good idea. So I have all my juniors have either already finished or just finishing doing research on colleges. And I always start them, what are you going to study? What do you think you're going to study? And give me, and you don't need to define your major right now, but you do need to know what you're looking for. So tell me 5 or 6 areas academically that you think you're going to work on. If those, the best way to get at that list from my perspective has always been to go negative. Like, do you want to do anything in healthcare? Do you want to be a doctor, nurse, physical therapist, anything? And going, and I often get no, and that eliminates a whole bunch of things to study. Would you major in biology? No way. So it's easy for them to say no. It's a lot tougher for them to say, yes, that's my thing, because it feels like a really deep commitment to this is what I want to dedicate my life to. The other thing to do is to separate academic learning from job. The vast majority of white collar jobs in America do not have a major associated with them. So it's okay to go get a liberal arts education and learn how to be a leader and a critical thinker. And so just think of a subject that you think is interesting as a student, right? That you just want to learn more about. And then if it ends up being 5 or 6 things, great. Then that's how you start researching the schools. I have one student right now that's interested in anthropology and archaeology. Not all schools have that as a major, and some do have it, and it's phenomenal. So if that happens to be one of the likely schools, and you say, okay, I'm going to a likely school, but at least I get to study archaeology there with these amazing faculty, that's an awesome outcome. Then think of the other things: location, size, cost. Time to think about it now. Things like student life, what are dorms like? Are they divided into colleges or not? I had one student look at UC San Diego and say, it just feels too goody two shoes in all of them. I'm like, okay, fair enough, because it kind of is. And then we looked at Berkeley and thought, that's kind of the same thing. So maybe not a great fit. So all that to work on the college list now, mostly just to get the wheels turning and start visiting colleges. Visiting in spring is a really good idea. And then that also helps you set a target test score, right? Because if you are going to go to Caltech, basically 75% of the students score 35 or higher, or 36 on the ACT. So then that sets your target. If you're not interested in those schools, and you have schools, if you want to go to state schools, that excluding the California ones that don't see the tests, but you can see what their middle 50% is and set a target in there. The reason to set a target is because most everyone can work long enough and hard enough to score higher on the test. You can always go higher, obviously, till you hit the top. But at some point, it's not worth it. If I can take a student who spent 100 hours trying to get an extra point on the ACT, as opposed to spending 100 hours doing some really good advocacy or really good community service, the community service advocacy is going to strengthen their application way more than one more point on the ACT. It's just not worth the time. So having a college list allows you to set a target test score. And then once you hit the target test score, leave it, you win, go do something else, go work on one of the other tracks of your application. Okay, college list. We have some tools at schools that more and more juniors are getting access. It used to be that only seniors would get a score, or Naviance or Maya Learning. account. And now more and more the juniors are getting it. What I love the most is looking at the scattergrams. The scattergrams show for your student's high school, what GPA and what test scores get denied, waitlisted, or admitted into the colleges. And what I love about that is because we're comparing a pool of students from the same school with a GPA calculated exactly the same way and standardized test scores. And that is way better than looking at what the colleges say the average GPA is, because that average GPA is calculated the way the college calculates the GPA. And I guarantee you it is different from the way that you're doing it. Some colleges drop the pluses and minuses. Some colleges, like the UC system in calculating GPA, does not include freshman year. So it's only sophomore and junior year. Some colleges use a weighted GPA. Some colleges use unweighted GPA and then measure whether a student challenged himself academically and by a different measure. So having these scattergrams is really, really good to be able to decide if a school is a reach, a target, or a likely. So take advantage of those. If the student hasn't heard of this yet, have the student go to the college counselor at school and see if they can get an account on it, because it helps the process tremendously. Okay, things for next semester. Academic track, obviously higher, still better. Pick challenging courses for senior year. I find I have to explain this more and more, but you can't get senioritis. It is possible that a student applies to for early decision will ask for mid-semester grades of senior year. If applying for regular decision, first semester grades will be taken into consideration. And even if applying early everywhere, chances are that the response from early applications is going to be deferred. That's what happens the most. So they defer decision to the regular round, then first semester grades come into play. Not only that, second semester grades senior year can also come into play if you are waitlisted. Because if you are waitlisted or deferred, either one of them, the right thing to do is to send an update letter that said, since I applied way back in October, here are very cool things that I've achieved in my senior year. And part of that is you need to show what classes you're taking in your application, no matter when you apply, but then show that you're challenging yourself and show that you're doing well. This happens all the way through the end of the year. If you get waitlisted at your top school in May, you will write an update letter and say, I still want to go there. A student that did that is now at UCLA. It was her top choice. And she got in May, and she wrote an update letter that ended up getting her in. So challenging courses for senior year. Testing, evaluate the results of the test. I have students that their initial take is, I'll just take it over and over again, but they don't do anything differently in preparing for it. And of course, the definition of is don't do the same thing and expect different results. So take it twice, as I said, decide on a possible third attempt if that's merited. School activities next semester, last chance to take an initiative on both inside and outside school. Next summer, start planning early. If you're going to do something academic, a lot of those applications are due early in the calendar year. So not so much January, but some are due February, definitely March. So think about that. If it's going to be an internship, often it takes a long time to get if you're going to do research at a college and are trying to contact faculty, that takes time and it takes planning. So start planning that early next semester. And then what I also ask students to do is I ask them in January to outline their essays. And this is sort of a last check on, do you need to do something else before you can write your essay? So, and so if you can't outline it, if you have your narrative, if you think, I think I'm going to tell them I'm this kind of person, and then you can't find an example of one of the items or a couple of the items, now is the moment to decide, okay, well, I'm not going to use those items. I need different ones. Or, yeah, I need to do one of these items. Let's pick leadership, but I have to do something about it so I can have a story to tell about my leadership skills. And so we outlined the ACEs in January just to have the opportunity to take remedial action. And we don't actually start writing them. Oh, we do the personal statement in the Common App. And I usually have my students, if the UCs are likely to be on their list, I have them outline those as well. That gives the students 5 essays to think about how they're going to convey the message and what examples they're going to use of the kind of person they are. And that is usually pretty good. And then it's just clearly a huge head start on writing the essays. I start writing the essays with my students as soon as school is over. And depending on the summer plans, we try to make as much progress so that by the time senior year starts, 80% of the writing is done. Doesn't always work out. Sometimes summers are very, very busy, but that's a good target to have in your head. So that's what I have to say. Happy to take questions if there are any. Oh, there are a couple questions. Will the PSAT count as one time for the digital test? Yes. The only caveat on that is the PSAT doesn't require much in terms of calculator, and there's a Desmos calculator in the test. So the only thing I would do is just use get used to using the Desmos calculator before you show up to the next test if you didn't use it on the PSAT. And then how many should you have of likelies? Tough question. But grossly, I think of likelies are somewhere between 70 and 90% likely that you'll get in. So still a possibility you won't get into one if you have 4 or 5, but you're going to get in. So the question is, how, what odds do you want to play? If you can find, I would definitely do 3 or more, but not more than 5 or 6. Because at some point, then these things still take time. They still take effort. Unless you're very borderline on if they're closer to 70 or 60% chances of getting in, and you can gauge that from the scattergrams. So I would say I generally have my students do somewhere between 3 and 5, and for the most part, they get into either all of them or 3 or 4 of them. It's tough to find the ones that we find a reason that you really want to go there. And it's hard to think of the possibility too. Most people are just thinking of the top, thinking of wild, crazy luck and success instead of, it's not fun to think of like, well, what if the good stuff doesn't happen? So that's generally the guideline for most of my students. I suggest doing 5 or 6 reaches, about 5 targets, and then 3 to 5 likelies. That depends on what they're going to study. I have some film students, for example, where the list was much shorter. I have some students who are really, especially when they're aiming for the Ivy Leagues and Stanford and Northwestern and all those, that will end up with 10 reaches, just because those top schools are super selective and they're a crapshoot for everybody. So then they're playing the odds on the fact that if you apply to a bunch of those schools, it is at least probabilistically more likely that you'll get in. It's still and it is a lot of work. So that's the only caveat on that. Okay. Unless there are any other questions, let's see, that's answered. That's all I have. So thank you so much for joining me for this. I hope it was useful. And if you have any questions, my email and phone number are at the bottom of this slide. Feel free to reach out and I'll be happy to give you some more. Thank you all for coming.